Okay, I'm going to get started now. I'm Bob. I'm a compulsive overeater, alcoholic, and I want people to like me. And I started to realize where the problem was, and it was Bob. So this is the Hour Power. I'm a member of BYOC, and the topic today is, it's interesting. The last meeting we had, somebody had said, I read from, the acceptance chapter in the big book, and they said, wow, there's so many gems from the other parts of the book. And I was just blown away. And I went to other parts that I had underlined and I had studied and just changed my life. And one of them was freedom from bondage. It's on page, if you have your big book there, it's good, and follow me. If you don't, it's fine too. I'm going to go through most of it. But we don't even have to go further than the name, right? The name alone tells us freedom from bondage. So what is this chapter about? It's freedom from bondage. Like the other chapter we talked about last time was the acceptance was the answer. So here's freedom from bondage. And when you listen to this, and if you really take this in, I have a feeling that, I know when I reread it this morning before the meeting, it's life-changing, because what the process and what it explains in here is the solution to our problems, the answer. Okay. It talks about everything in the program here and the steps and that spiritual awakening. So, but it starts with exactly what the problem is, because if we don't know what the problem is, then we can't solve it. So listen to this closely. It's really interesting. It could be life-changing. If you look at what it says right in italics there, young when she joined, this AAer believed her serious drinking was result of even deeper defects. So alcohol, food, addiction to people, our problems and resentments and anger is only deeper defects, right? But you're gonna see as we go along, we have a step forward where we get rid of these defects. But first we have to understand where they are and where they come from. And it's related to all of our addictions, whether it's with the alcohol, the food, or all our problems in life, restless, irritable, discontent. So she tells how she was set free. Okay, again, let me repeat that. She tells how she was set free. So for anybody listening, if you have these issues and problems, resentment, anger, depression, anxiety, here it's telling you how you can be set free. Here's the instructions that this person, where she went through and had that freedom. So if we follow it closely, it will really tell us what happened, and we could believe me, you could bring it into your own life and have that spiritual awakening. So here it goes. The mental twists. Okay, the mental twist. It talks about on page 33 in the big book, it talks about that mental twist, the thing that brings us to our addiction, the crazy thinking. Step 2 says we were insane. We had to be restored to sanity. So here we go. So the mental twist that led up to my drinking or overeating or other compulsions began many years before I even took a drink. For I am one of those whose history proves conclusively that my drinking was a symbol of deeper trouble. And on page 167, it goes, our drinking is only a symbol, right? Is a symbol. So it has to do with our thinking, that mental twist. So in this program, fortunately, it talks about we can have that mental twist towards being happy, joyous, and free. And here it says freedom from bondage. So here we go. And in the next paragraph on page 544, again, 544 in freedom from bondage, the last sentence in the second paragraph, it says, I never did react normally to any emotional situation. So isn't that the fact in my life, my problems were because I didn't react normally. I resented out of fear, anger. I resented out of selfishness, self-centeredness, the ego. So it says, I never did react normally. So let me just mute the meeting for one. Okay. So right away, the thing I didn't understand in my whole life, again, where the problem was. So here it's saying, right here, it's telling me, because you can't resolve a problem until you understand where it starts. So here it's telling us right away, I never did react normally. So it had to do me and my reaction. And the next paragraph is extremely powerful, because what it does, it tells me my whole life, the way I tried to resolve all these problems and issues and things in my life, my addictions, my addiction and problem with dealing with people, my addiction problem with alcohol, drugs, and especially we talk about a lot with the food, that major addiction, that mental twist. So here it talks about, and it says here, it's really interesting because it says the medical profession, right? It's talking about these people we revere as of having all the answers. But just to divert back in the doctor's opinion, Dr. Silkwood said that all the medical people, all the scientists could not have the answer to the problem with our addiction to alcohol and our food, maybe alcohol, food, and our situation with people. So it goes on to say here, the professionals would tell me I was conditioned for alcoholism by the things that happened to me in my childhood. So I always thought those things outside of me, what my parents did, what society did, these traumas and experiences in my life was the reason that what happened to me. Listen, this is really, really interesting because this is the crux of the whole thing. This is where we have that awakening and understanding of a new way of living. And it says here that transformation. And I am sure they were right as far as they go. Really interesting the way he words that, as far as they go. But AA has taught me I am the result of the way. Now, again, on page 544, if you look at the second paragraph, the way I reacted is in italics. And we all know that means it's really important. So the way I reacted to what happened to me as a child. Isn't that amazing? That's, for me, that was a transformation. It wasn't about what people did to me. It was the way I reacted as a child. So I couldn't resolve the issue because I blamed the situations, the people, everything outside of myself, right? The world and the human experience, right? But I didn't realize it had to do with me and my thinking. Then I was a child, but I just want to say now we're adults. So we can make excuses then, but I don't know what our excuse would be now. If we pick up this simple program, it's life changing. What is more important to me, it's really amazing. AA has taught me that through this simple program, again, I always emphasize this, but why does he use the word simple? I mean, we always, I went to therapy for years. I tried to analyze. I had shelves full of self-help books. I always try to figure it out. It seemed that my intellect told me this had to be a situation that was really complicated. And unless I did all of these things, did all of these different things in my life, I would not be resolved of these issues and problems in my life. But here it says it's a simple program. What is that? I may experience a change in this reaction pattern that will indeed allow me to match calamity with serenity. Now, in Bill's story, page 15, he talks about meeting calamity with serenity. So what does that mean? It means that in my life, the worse the problem is, the more calamity I have, it seems like proportionally I could have more serenity. So how could that be possible? Because it brings me closer to this program, this steps in my higher power, you know. So let's go on here. And it says, and it goes, if we go on page 545, so it says on the second paragraph, the last sentence says, I thought that life was pretty simple thing. You simply made a plan for your life. Okay, our little plans and designs. If I plan my life, great, everything be good, based upon what you wanted. This is what our desire, desiring is the cause of all suffering. So the things that we desire, that we want, we think these are going to make us happy. Okay, then you needed only the courage to go after it. So here she's saying that she had figured that if she would just plan and control things outside of herself, then life would be great. That she had the ability we have through the self, if we control things and we do everything outside of ourselves, interesting. Once in a while, I think of these phrases that come upon, and just one that I have to bring out right now, and it's just like spiritual comfort surpasses all worldly pleasures and delights. So that spiritual comfort that comes in, but I wanted to just say that because this is the direction we're going in. So anyway, in my late teens, on page 544, I became aware of emotions I'd not counted on: restlessness, anxiety, fear, and insecurity. So she was experiencing restlessness, anxiety, fear, and insecurity. So the question is, why was she experiencing this? And why did I realize in my life, why was I experiencing this? But it tells us, she said it was simple. The answer was in the last sentence of the last paragraph. based upon what you wanted, and then you needed only the courage to go after it. So if I feel that the things in life, my only happiness is going to come if I get the things I want, if I win the lottery, if people respect me, if I make more money and have a better position in life, then I would be happy. But it only leads to, these are material things, it leads to restlessness, anxiety, fear, and insecurity. Now, if anybody listening has any restlessness, anxiety, or insecurity, it's due to the self. If we if we don't have desire is a cause of all suffering. If we don't want all these things of the transitory world, and we find spiritual solution, which we do, and she's going to find eventually, then we're happy, joyous, and free. Again, as we read this, we're going to find the solution, and this is directly related for us to gluttony, needing more with food, the alcoholism, needing more with something outside of ourselves, drugs, and needing people to like us and be respected. And then we could be happy. But even, it's an amazing thing, and I always bring up this as example. And she's going to find out here in the next paragraph. I don't want to give it away, but I have to bring this example of about the man who climbs Mount Everest. Okay. Or if we win the lottery, it's a momentary fleeting pleasure. The man gets to the top of the mountain. He's happy. It goes away in a few minutes or whatever. But if we want the eternal joy and happiness, and related to what I just said, she goes on to say, what happens? The only type of security, we all want security, happiness, joyfulness, and freedom, I knew anything about at that time was material security, right? The material things. We're brought up to think when we're children, if we did better in school, better in sports, became more successful. These are all material things. We live in a material society. That's where they say our happiness comes from. Now, the same with our addiction to the food and the alcohol advertised on TV down the highway. They're telling you if you have this material thing, if you listen to the commercial, it talks about this blissfulness, happiness, and joy. But again, the food only brings us, the alcohol and drugs only momentary pleasure. The people, if somebody promotes us at our job, it's momentary. If somebody says they like us and we're great, that's momentary pleasure. So we're going to find out where the real happiness, joy, and total blissfulness comes in through this step 12, having had that spiritual awakening. Again, this is directly related. If again, a lot of people I know are here with the food, but when you have this transformation, it could be with the food and with the addictions, and anything along those lines, because we're making those our higher power. Again, it said bottles were only a symbol. That was what we made our image of a higher power was. When I was drinking alcohol, it was all about, well, if I have a bad day or whenever it was, I could just have this drink. Then it also was about no matter what happens, I could eat this food or, binge, or I could, this was the solution. But it was devastating my body, physically, mentally. It just creates such havoc in my life. But again, we need this. There's a spiritual solution to all of this. So it says here, material security. That was what she thought the answer was. And then we're wondering why in our lives too, why are we so upset, depressed, anxious because of that? We think it's in material security. And I decided that all these intruders would vanish immediately if only I had a lot of money, right? Material success, money, right? More money, more food, more drugs, more alcohol. The solution seems so very simple. Okay. With cold calculation, I set out about to marry a fortune, and I did. But she says here, the only thing this has changed, however, was my surroundings. And it was soon apparent that I could have the same uncomfortable emotions with an unlimited checking account, and that I could on a working girl's salary. So starting to realize the answer wasn't there. That's, they say we can accept this program only after we hit bottom. So here she's starting to hit bottom, and then she realized, the worst thing that could have been for her was when she found some success in this money and then started enjoying being on a yacht or getting more clothes or just that glorious life, because it wouldn't have brought us to the real happiness, joy, and peace. It would have been about the material. It would have been about the material money, the food, the alcohol, the drugs. It's no way to live. We all know where it leads, what path it goes down, because we're making out that a higher power. And then it was impossible for me to say at this point, maybe there is something wrong with my philosophy. Wow. So my philosophy, this whole book is about a transformation of thinking, that whole philosophical talks. we're not going to read it now, but on page 25, it says a transformation in the thinking. And also in We Agnostics, it says a better philosophy or morals of life were the answer, we would have recovered long ago. So it's amazing. So from hitting bottom, that's the only way it seems we can get this program. Maybe there is something wrong with me. Imagine that. Imagine how we talk about other people being toxic and our problems. If only our spouse was different, if only our boss at work was different, if only I was taller or shorter, if only I was 100 pounds lighter, or if I had my goal weight, if I had this or if I had that. But for some reason, and we know why, just like the man who climbed Mount Everest, he was happy for a moment. And that's why, even trying to get to being abstinent or sober isn't the answer. We could be miserable. So many people are what they call the jumping off point, where they get to that point where they just really have that moment where they just want to jump off, and but they've been abstinent, they've been sober. So, and maybe there's something wrong with me. It was not difficult to convince myself that my unhappiness was the fault of the man I married. So, it's the easiest, softer way is blaming other people and trying to figure out how to change them and change the world and just change and, analyze it. So then she divorced him at the end of a year. The next page, on page 546, then she married another guy, a man who many women wanted. I thought this would give me ego strength, make me feel wanted and secure. Again, we only want this security, happiness, joy, and freedom. That's what we want. We want to be happy and alleviate my fears. We want to get out of that self-centered fear. But again, nothing changed inside of me. Can you imagine that? Going through life and people actually, yourself, people are billionaires, very successful, we know ourselves. When I get something that I was dreaming of, I wanted, the happiness was momentary. It just was momentary, and it created more problems than it actually gave me. And it says in the next paragraph on page 546, I was just as sick as I was at 33 when I came into AA. Now, you hear a lot of people say they've been in this program. Myself was in quite a few years, and then I was still miserable, irritable, and discontent. But we have the answer to these steps, and this program gives the solution. And again, I just want to say it's a solution even with our addictions directly, with the addictions we have. So, and if you go down towards the middle of the paragraph, it says that my basic problem was spiritual hunger. That's all the doctor's opinion. There is a solution. All of the chapters in the first part of the book about is having that spiritual awakening. So, there's one solution it talks about, and we agnostics, we lack the power, and that we realize, these alcoholics realize there was only one answer, a spiritual answer solution, going back to the Dr. Silkworth and the doctor's opinion. That AA has shown me the truth. Okay, so this is an interesting concept. And how it works, it starts out 3 times where it uses the word honesty. So, there's a saying, right, that comes from religion, the truth will set you free. But I didn't understand. I thought the truth meant that if I was at a cash register in a store, giving somebody the cash register honesty, the proper change. But here it's saying, AA show me that this was the truth. But right before that, the phrase before that said, as I just read, that my basic problem was spiritual hunger. So the truth was that something inside of me, philosophically and spiritually, I had a spiritual sickness. And I love the phrase it talks about on page 67, where it says, if this spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Again, if the spiritual malady, so the spiritual is a solution to all our situations and all our problems. So if I go on from here, it says, next sentence on page 546 in the middle, I am sure they could not have convinced me my sickness was within myself, nor could they have shown me that the need for self-analysis that AA has shown me. So it's saying the sickness is in myself. Knowing where the sickness is means that everything, all the issues and problems we have, I love that phrase I heard once in a meeting, if I have a problem, I'm the problem. So that's exactly the conclusions. All of these trite sayings we hear is the conclusion that she's coming to. My sickness was in myself. But she said, as of yet, she was not convinced. Right before it says, I was not convinced. And then if you go down next paragraph, it seemed right from the beginning that with liquor, I could always retire to my little private world where nobody could get at me to hurt me. Wow. Doesn't that relate to all our addictions? That little private world. I go in the house, I pull the shutters down, and I could, it could be food, and I eat, and I can block out the whole world. But what am I doing? I'm making myself isolated. I'm making life all about this food. And again, I gobble it down, or I could have a drink. Now I don't, but when I drank, I would drink, and it was momentary pleasure. But it caused more, the alcohol, the physical, the emotional, the food, the devastating physical, medical problems, mental problems, the blood sugar, and just that we could have a whole new, better way through this revolutionary change in thinking. And again, when we have this shift, we don't have to fight it anymore. It says in the 10-step promises, we're position neutrality. We're not fighting it. We're not trying to sort it out anymore. We don't have to fight it. So all of a sudden we have that because the thing is, we could be abstinent from food or alcohol for a long time, but if we're miserable, especially with the food, why even, we'd say sometimes that people used to come to AA and then we would say, well, if you're so miserable and you don't want to work the steps, come back when you want to. If we read on, again, I talked about the 10-step promises. The 9th-step promises says we'll be happy, joyous, and free. We'll lose all fear of everything. Believe me when I tell you this will happen. So here's what's happening here, where nobody could get at me and hurt me. So here she would isolate. And then it would go on to say on page 547, about the 5th sentence down, I realize now that this phase of my development had been arrested by my obsession with self. Again, selfishness, self-centeredness. On page 62, part of step 3, it talks about this is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-pity, the self, ego, easing God out. This, the whole spirituality is, and when we try to figure it out, is again, we can't, because it's coming from the ego. And the Dr. Silkworth realized, and we agnostics and all of these steps all talk about getting out of the self and finding that, that power is within us all the time. The revolutionary change towards our perception through food and through God consciousness is there all the time. Again, my body's God's temple. When I have that change of thinking, the perception towards the food changes. I don't want the man-made poisonous food. I won't get into all the things about it now. In a lot of meetings we do. The poisons that are in there, the high no nutrition, all synthetic processed foods. So we want to be joyous in God's given food from the earth. They always bring up the water and an apple or whatever it is. The perception change. We have that complete perception change when we work this program and towards life. And we walk out the door. We're no longer isolated. We're no longer finite. We're in talks about being infinite. We enjoy nature. We enjoy the outdoors, right? So we could go in our car and we can enjoy just driving, right? Before, with my addiction, I either had a bottle of vodka, was slugging that down, or I had food, all kinds of food, eating it, right? That's no kind of life. You're missing out on that. You're making it all about the material thing. It could be lust, right? The 7 deadly sins. Gluttony is one of them, lust, okay? Pride, arrogance, it all has to do with the self. And that's what she said here, right? I realize now that this phase of my development had been arrested by the obsession with the self, all about the self-centeredness and ego. And my egocentricity had reached such proportions that adjustment to anything outside my personal control was impossible for me. So when we're in the ego and the self, it tells us what does step 2 says. Step 1 says we're powerless. Step 2 says we had to find a higher power, right? So she's saying she's coming to these understandings. Now, I go to a lot of meetings. I know my own, okay, I'll speak of my own life. When I'm upset, it's all because I'm getting back into the self-will. Okay. In me, there's 2 sides to us. There's the human side and the spiritual side. God created us in his creation to have that spiritual, overwhelming joy, peace, and love, and moderation in our addictions and not going to them. It's all about not making them a higher power. But we chose the self, because in the beginning, when I read the chapter, she was told and brought up to think that if she only did things right, married the right man, had more money, had more success, that she would be happy. And so here she's back into the self, she can't find an answer. And she said, um, for my remorse and shame and humiliation when I was sober was almost unbearable. So all the defects of character, the guilt, the shame, the remorse, the pride, the envy, the jealousy, all of these defects of character are because there's self. You got to lose the self to find the self. So when we get out of the self, then we can find the answer. And it says here, the only way existence was possible was through rationalizing every sober moment and drinking myself into complete oblivion as often as I could. So when I'm in the self, I want oblivion because I'm so miserable that we go to the addictions. Okay, so if we go to page, we'll skip ahead and go to page 550. We're going already now to 550. And if we go to like the second paragraph on page 550, it says, in the middle there, my desire to be honest with myself made it necessary for me to realize my thinking was irrational. Again, the word honest. So we hear in this program, honest, honest. And a lot of people say, well, I have to tell my sponsor all my issues and my problems, and I have to be honest with somebody, a boss at work, or about money, or all of these things, and tell them my feelings. It says, honest with myself. Again, it's talking about this honesty that can only, the truth will set us free, right? The honesty within us. It made me realize that my thinking was irrational. I used to think everybody else, my parents were irrational. I used to think all these people outside of me, my boss, all they were irrational. If on pages 60 and 61, it talks about if I'm the director and only everybody else would act right, then my life would be great and happy and freedom. So here she's coming to the complete realizing with the honesty with herself meant to think her thinking was crazy, right? She was the one who was creating the problems, right? When we get centered, I realize when I'm centered, the answer to my problems, and I said this before, is to realize I have no problems, right? Or if I have a problem, I'm the problem. Because that change of thinking, it doesn't matter. It talks about going through the valley of the death and all these armies around us. What they're talking about in that psalm, in the big book there in the Bible, it says, when the interpretation is that the fear is within me, okay? And when I have this God consciousness and I have that transformation, then I have that confidence and serenity and peace. So, one guy told me this story. He was from India. I work with him, and he said when the elephant walks down the street and the dogs bark at his feet, ankles, the elephant is not concerned. So the same with us. When we have this all power, and it says in the big book, all power and joy and happiness comes from our Creator and God. When we have that transformation, that is really the truth. The truth is because we know in our lives, our misery and depression has to come when we think about other people, making other people, our higher power. Why would we even, after doing this, and she's come to the realization, she's realizing here that why would she care whether she has a lot of money, a lot of prestige, people like her or not? She's finding now the real joy and happiness, the kingdom of heaven, right? The real thing is not in the transitory world, it's in here. It's not in our five senses. Again, the big book talks about that fourth dimension. What do you think they're talking about there? Rising above. Well, we can go out and enjoy everything material about the world. We can enjoy what we see, hear, and feel and touch. That's directly related, of course, to the food. But we have to understand that that's not the answer. That's not the real happiness and joy and what God created us. That's not what our soul wants. That's what the material. Again, God gave us this ability to think on a higher level. We have that ability above any other uh, animals in his kingdom, right? But with it, we misuse it. And it talks about in here about self-will run riot. So we misuse it to think about what people say or think about us. We intellectualize it. But we have to get out of the self and out of the intellect and just get into higher consciousness. So it goes on to say on the bottom of page 550, AA has given me serenity of purpose and the opportunity to be of service to God and to the people about me. So a lot of people, it talks about this in We Agnostics. It says man is going from one place into another and we're just floating around and we need purpose in life. The real purpose it tells us here is our service to God and the service to people. Step 12 talks about doing this in all our affairs and helping other alcoholics. And it says, AA has taught me on the very bottom of page 550 that I will have peace of mind in exact proportion to the peace of mind I bring into the lives of other people. It has taught me the true meaning of admonition. Happy are ye who these things and do for them. And it says, for the only problems I have now are those I created when I break out in a rash of self-will. I heard this, somebody say this on the meeting the other day, and it's right here on page 551. For the only problems I have are those I create when I break out into a rash of self-will. Whenever I'm miserable, irritable, or discontent today in my life, if I go through the day today, it's because I'm taking my self-will back, because then it becomes all about me and my. But again, if I get out of the self-will and losing the self and get into this program and it's coming from a higher consciousness, then why would anything? There's no self anymore. Even if I find out, something, again, the political situation is virus. When we're upset, it has to do with the self, or even our own death. People do these religious readings and they say philosophies, and it's said that it's to accept your death, right? So when we have out of the self, we can accept anything. So if somebody pushes our buttons, a boss at work yells at us, or whatever, or a person says something about us, or we don't have to worry anymore, because it's not about us, right? We can observe it. Some people say I can't live with myself, right? And they start to realize there are two selves. There's the egocentric self, which is coming from the lower levels of thinking. The higher consciousness, in the way to permanent joy and happiness, is within, with this spirituality. This concept of God was in us all the time. It says on page 55, it was in every man, woman, and child. It was just there. But why don't we experience it? Because step 4, our defects of character, pride, envy, the 7 deadly sins, which Bill talks about in the AA 12 and 12 on page 48. He puts the 7 deadly sins there. He writes them down. So he says, as I said earlier, self-pity and resentment were my constant companions, for I had seemed to have a resentment against everybody I had ever known. So what happened to me is I had resentments. I said, well, maybe my parents were toxic, a sibling. But then I realized, as I grew and to know other people, the same resentments would come back, because wherever I went, right, the saying is the problem was I had to bring myself with me. Then she goes on, talks about a resentment against her mother, and it was 25 years old. So for 25 years, I fed it, I fanned it, and nurtured it. So here she's talking about a resentment for 25 years. I mean, it's amazing, because in my life, 10, 20 years later, I'd have that same resentment, taking the poison, hoping the other person would die. You've heard that expression, renting free space in my head all that time. So what is the resolution? In my prayers that morning, I asked God to point out to me some way I could be free of the resentment. So here's an amazing revelation. She's not asking, maybe her therapist. She's not going to 20 people in the room. She's not going to a sponsor, right? All the time, you hear it. You say, go to the room, share your problems, and talk to 10 people about it. Ask your sponsor what you should do. I used to read self-help books. I used to try to figure it out. But what is she saying here? In my prayers that morning, I asked God to point me to a way to free me of the resentment. And we're going to finish with this on page 552. This is how she expresses we can do it. And resentment is resentment, it talks about, is the number one killer of us people with these addictions. Resentment is the whole problem. Step 4 is related to self-centered fear based on resentment. The anger, the resentment, the jealousy, the envy, it all has to do with the resentment. So he said, in effect, on page 552, the first paragraph. So here we go. And then we'll hear shares after this. If you have resentment you want to be free of, if you will pray for the person or the thing you resent, you will be free. Again, we want to be free. The name of the chapter is Freedom from Bondage. If you will ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you will be free. Even when you don't really want it for them and your prayers are only words, you don't mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. Do it every day for 2 weeks, and you will find you have come to mean it and want it for them. You will realize that where you used to feel bitterness, resentment, and hatred, you will feel compassion, understanding, and love. Compassion, understanding, and love This talks about in this book, and the way to do it is through that God consciousness. Also, and we're going to get to shares now, but if you read on page 66 and 67, where it goes into resentment and a sick man for it, it talks about this. I actually call this another fourth step prayer. And we have the sick man prayer on page 66 to 67, which is also the fourth step prayer. But anyway, with that, okay.